Well,
will get,
that's-
being redrawn.
well, yeah, we just need to have is that our highest priority is the word? I mean, we need to decide that, but
Andreas,
that,
Perfect.
yeah, that,
could you give me a minute after the meeting?
Quick conversation.
Okay.
I believe so, but we'll see.
The master plan?
We welcome you to the meeting of the Logan-Cache Airport Authority Board. We have some visitors. Ken Campbell, manager of the Vernal Airport, the board. So he drove up just so he could attend one of our meetings or something like that. We'll begin by calling for an approval of the minutes from the March 2nd meeting. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. We approve the minutes from the March 2nd meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Last month, at the meeting of the Utah Airport Operators Association, one of our number, Bill Francis, was honored for his lifetime of service to aviation in the state. He loved aviation since becoming aware of airplanes flying over Brigham City, Utah. As a young teen, he would walk to the airport and help wash planes in exchange for a ride with the local pilots. He earned his private pilot license while still in high school, trained with the legendary pilot John Weir. A side note, that training often took place in a 150. It was over gross before anybody besides Johnny Weir got in the plane. Stu Hunsaker knows Johnny Weir. So. He was awarded the Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award in 2019 for being an active pilot for more than 50 years. His involvement with aviation in Cache Valley could fill volumes. In 1991, an interlocal agreement was set up which put control of the Logan-Cache Airport under an airport authority board made up of 7 community members, 3 appointed by Logan City, 3 appointed by Cache County, and 1 at-large member. Bill was the first at-large member. He served for 14 years, from 92 to 2006, before being released for 5 years. He was reappointed in 2012 and served until his retirement until October of 22. Bill acted as interim airport manager intermittently until an airport manager was hired in early 2000s. He completed a variety of tasks ranging from repairing taxiway lighting, plowing snow, hauling discarded tires and trash from the airport, mowing grass, and building an airport community. The Airport Authority Board was lucky to have Sarah Ann Skanke as another original member. She was a lawyer who worked tirelessly to help Cache County in general and the airport in particular as they experienced growing pains. She and Bill made a great team. She handled the official airport business, and Bill did the hands-on work needed to keep the airport functioning. They worked together on the board from 1992 to 2007. Bill was a very vocal proponent of the need of the lengthening of the runway 1735 for the safety of the flying public in Cache Valley. During the late 1990s, the Airport Authority Board worked to acquire the land and rights-of-way needed to make the goal possible. This was not always popular stance with the community members, but was finally realized in the year 2000. Runway 1735 was extended in 2001 to its current length and was the second longest public use airport until St. George was completed, and they made a point to make theirs 5 feet longer. Improvements to lighting and infrastructure, as well as a wildlife fence around the entire airport, were part of this project. Bill had a talent for working with the FAA and Utah State Division of Aeronautics to get things accomplished. He worked closely with Craig Sparks, Barbara John, be accomplished in poor weather conditions. Bill's love of aviation was demonstrated as he worked to improve the Logan-Cache Airport. He wanted the airport to be available to pilots, students, visitors, and anyone else who had an interest in aviation. Above all, he wanted it to be a safe, inviting place for everyone. Bill was unable to attend. His health is still a challenge for him, but we're happy to have his daughter Seneca here. Would you come forward, Seneca?
Does he need a copy of the citation, or has he seen that?
Take that.
He should have a copy of that.
Jason.
He's going, I think is awesome. So thanks, John, for sharing that. And so, yeah. So obviously snow is what I've been doing, still snowing here in almost the middle of April. We have our crosswind runway is still closed. We typically open that March 31st, but we've extended that until further notice. So the crosswind's still closed, 1028, and taxiway Charlie is still closed because it, especially on the far southwest corner, there's about a foot of snow piled up down there because we don't plow that section. So a quick update on something the FAA is doing, and we had a pretty big meeting, pretty much every airport across the country, is they're implementing a safety management system, an SMS. And as of today, we technically don't meet the requirements to have to do that, but I believe in the near future, due to the forecasted operations at the airport, we will, I believe, be meeting that obligation as long as everything is accepted as far as how many operations we're projecting in the future.
What are we short on being able to do that?
Oh, so there's 3 requirements. The one that we're gonna meet is the 100,000 operations.
But that's what would take us into needing to meet the requirements of the safety protocol. But what do we have enough? Are we doing enough that we'd qualify to do it, or do we have to step up in anything?
So we'll have to step up some things. The airport certification manual will have to have either a SMS section in it, or it will have to point to a separate document saying refer to that document and things like. So basically what it is, it opens a line of communication for anyone on the airport, from the FBO, the college, hangar owners, to be able to communicate safety hazards on the airfield. And so that's basically what it is a reporting system to let everybody in on the communication loop, basically to let us know that there's a problem. And so that's the basis of the safety management system. And then from our point of view, how are we gonna address incidences or concerns that come up? And so that's kind of what the safety management system is. And then we have to rank it, a ranking system, how, if something comes up, how dangerous or potentially dangerous is these, and then based on those levels of threats, how are we going to handle the different situations. So as far as personnel or things we need to address them, I don't believe it'll be too much of a concern as far as handling the situations. if something crazy was to happen, I'm not sure. I mean, to go back to the snow, I think that might be the biggest thing that might get brought up. Like this year, I know there was some issues brought up about some of the snow levels and things like that. And so, yes, that is a safety concern. How are we going to handle that situation when situations come up? That I think could potentially take some resources and things to address the concerns, but actually creating the safety management system, I don't think is a big deal. Just maybe some time for me to write it and insert in the certification manual. So, it is kind of new to me, new to everybody. They have a lot of templates on their website to help guide me write it and everything like that. So. But I basically just wanted to let you guys be aware of it, that it is, the FAA is mandating it, and I believe it, when the new master plan comes out with, and when we hit that 100,000, when they accept that that's our operation number, that we will be implementing this, and I'll keep you up to date if I learn anything, and so, and I guess with that, the other thing, just our snow equipment, it has been a challenge getting through with our equipment, with our personnel. I have got a mechanic who's been a lot more helpful than the previous. And so they are expensive, but I guess everything's expensive, but I have found someone that's willing to help. So we put a new clutch in one of the trucks. We're getting a new box blade on our loader. And this is all in the middle of 6 to 8 inches of snow falling, and it's been a learning curve for me. And I hope by next winter, I'm gonna probably keep talking about it through the following months. But I feel that something needs to be done before next winter as far as equipment, manpower. We're losing some people for next winter. We're going to have to figure out how to replace those. Kim Hall has helped me. Logan City sent out some people, and they're no longer able to help next year. So we're having to replace basically 55 years combined experience with these 3 to 4 people. And so that's definitely a concern for me. This winter we made it through. Maybe everyone keeps saying this was the worst winter in a long time. So I don't know, maybe if I'm exaggerating or not, but
Chair, if I can talk on that one, I'd like to talk a little bit on equipment, if you're all right with that. Is that okay? To speak with them about equipment here? Just asking if I have the floor a little bit.
Let's hold that.
Okay.
And maybe you two should meet together and, if you have some ideas and come back to the board with a recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I just look at most of that equipment that is out of the airport was before I entered high school.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, the other one is that, if an accident had happened in Provo, the accident that happened in Provo, it had happened here, and we had the equipment we've got a huge liability. And I think we should know it as a board.
Yeah.
I think we should know that as a board, that cost of equipment, if that had been here, I'm certain that the lawsuit would have started.
Are you talking about the ARF truck or the snow removal equipment?
Well, snow removal equipment. I mean, I think we have one piece of equipment that's inside the last couple of years, but everything else is over 30, almost 30 years old.
the only thing that is not 30 years old is the piece of equipment that we lease. The loader that we lease is the only thing, yeah, that's within this century.
Yeah,
I just would like to, I'd like to have him focus some of his time on being able to find some equipment. I think there's some equipment out there that maybe is even surplus that's better than what we have.
But again, if you don't have personnel, maybe it's time to contract. So, you have a service that comes in with the equipment, with the personnel. I don't know, that's.
We did get some quotes from Cache County to do that, and it was not anywhere close to being in the range of what we could afford. So we've thought about reaching out to others. So we have looked into things like trying to contract out, but
I think the mayor's suggestion that we workshop that is probably appropriate, and then come to the board with some details and some solutions.
and Ryan's right. At the UAOA, Provo did a presentation on the accident that happened. They showed pictures, and they were out plowing right when it happened. The plane crashed right in front of the manager in a plow truck. And as prepared as they thought they were, being in a plow truck, I mean, it's just different, but just hearing their story of it all. And yeah, they got looked into and investigated about how much snow was out there and their equipment and everything like that. And they weren't seen to be at fault, but if there's an accident, especially with a fatality, there's definitely investigations into.
And we're sixth largest airport in the state? We are. Isn't Logan about the sixth largest airport in the state? Provo's maybe third?
On operations based
Yeah, we're not
wise,
far.
yeah, around there, 5, 6.
Anyway, I just think that maybe we should challenge our manager to spend some time finding a plan to be able to work on updating the equipment. I'm happy to help, but I think that's,
On it, yeah.
We have been working on it, but I would love, your emails have been helpful and some of our chats. So I'll keep working on it, and yeah, I hope by next winter we have a couple things, and then our CIP has some stuff for the following year to help with a piece of equipment, but that's still a couple years out. So yeah, we've been working on some things, and so hopefully we can soon have some more information and a game plan set forward, and things like that. So I think that's all I have today.
Great,
So-
thank
Did
you.
you get
Okay.
a request for hangar space? Do you want to
Oh,
handle
yes,
that now?
I almost forgot about that. Thank you. That wasn't on the agenda, so yep, we created a waiting list for the hangar spots that we have available. There's 2. The one's kind of a smaller spot, so it's, no one really seems to be jumping at the idea to take that smaller spot. But I do have a request from a person requesting to build, his name's Trent Robertson. He wants to build a 60 by 60 on lot Alpha 32. He has put the $500 deposit down, and he's interested in the smaller one.
And no one else is on the waiting list
Um,
ahead of this gentleman.
Correct. There was one person, but he decided to back out of the 60 by 60 and he doesn't want the smaller one.
Okay.
So yeah, so this Trent became number 1,
Well, then it,
and so at this point,
And
yes.
if we approve it, then he has 1 year from today to begin construction. Is that correct?
Yes, he's aware of that. Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion that we accept the request?
I mean, that wasn't on the agenda. Does that one have to be noticed on the agenda?
I don't think so.
Yeah, okay.
I'll make the motion that we accept the request.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve Mr. Robertson's request for a hangar lease on Alpha 32. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, and as of now, there's nobody on the waiting list. We officially don't have a waiting list for the new project, India. We will probably transfer the few people that are on this list to India, but that will be probably a discussion for another day if we want to just move them.
So you said there's nobody on the list, but you're gonna transfer people on the list?
So I guess there was about 35 people on the list, and then we created, with Taylor's help, an official waiting list, and that boiled it
You
down.
had to pay the $500 fee to be on the list.
Yep,
To
and
show seriousness, yeah.
That's what boiled it down to the 4 or 5 people. And so then I said, okay, are you gonna build on the spot? And when they got into the details and tried to get prices and financing, they've all backed out. So no one wanted the 60 by 60 and no one wanted the smaller 40 by 45. And so I guess they've been crossed out. I don't,
Went through the list and they lost their place. If they choose to come back to the list again, they have to repay the $500 and get at the bottom of the line, correct? Isn't that the policy?
I don't know if they have to pay the 500 again.
You specifically discussed that.
Okay.
I'm quite, it's,
Yeah, if they drop off, they have to pay again.
yeah.
To get back on the
secure a
list.
new spot.
I'm not sure I understood it that way, that they could opt to go to the bottom of the list again with their 500.
I think we should go back and check minutes on that. I think
Our discussion as we passed that was that they did have to actually, again, we want people to be serious about this. You know, if they're,
and they've got $500 in it, but
if we could go back and check minutes on that, I believe that was part of the discussion.
Okay.
Okay. So,
But thank you for going through the procedure and checking with all of them, and so I
Yep.
think the procedure's working. None of those people can come back and complain that they weren't given a fair shot, so.
yeah, I went through the whole 35, we called them all, and I slowly went through it and explained the procedure, and like I said, only about 5 ended up paying. It's taken some time. I took a couple months to go through it, and I went slowly to give them a fair chance to give the money and everything like that. So I feel like it was a good process, and everyone had a fair chance to put the money down. And
Okay, thank you.
okay, thank you.
Stuart?
Day of reckoning, I guess, eh? Okay, it's been an interesting month.
If you come to the microphone, then it's better for the minutes, right?
Okay, well, I figured that I talked loud enough that you wouldn't have an issue hearing me on the minutes, but that's fine. It has been an interesting month. I've learned a couple of things in the last 3.5 weeks that proved me a little bit in error when I addressed you the first time. My first assumption that turned out to be wrong was Utah actually has a curated register of historic sites and accepted applications and would in fact certify just in the state. That's not true. Hasn't been true for perhaps 40 years. So the only game in town is the National Register. My communicant, the state actually has an office called the Utah State Historic Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO for short. My communicant down there was Corey Jensen, who is the compliance officer. I think he's the gentleman that basically looks over the requests that are going up to the state and says, yes, that will fly, or no, you should do something a little bit different with this request. When he sent me the email, he said that private individuals, municipalities and or counties are not allowed to actually turn in a request to the National Register. And along with that, he sent me a consultant list. And he said, these people do this for a living. This is, if you want your building listed as a landmark, these are the people that will help you get this done. So I went through the list, talked to Mr. Peterson down in Wendover. He's had 2 of those approved. He gave me the name of the gentleman, the consultant that helped him. He said, I really like him. That would be Ron Sladek, S-L-A-D-E-K, Tatanka Historical Associates. I looked at his webpage. This gentleman not only did Wendovers too, but have a number of airport-related requests that have been successful. So I sent him an email asking for a proposal. There's a company called Paleo West. They're multi-state, but they have an office here in Logan. And so I sent a letter to him figuring, yeah, the guy's here. He would have a better grasp on our situation. He's also preparing a request. According to Corey down there, it's a little more nuanced and quite a bit different. I guess it's something that a person could actually do, follow whatever steps are necessary, complete the surveys, do the paperwork. But I understand it also, there's kind of an argument. You have to argue why this particular building deserves landmark status. And I'm not so sure that I'm that convincing of a writer. I haven't seen amounts. When I do get those proposals from those two gentlemen, they'll be forwarded to the board so that y'all can look at them. I still think having the building as a landmark on the register is the way to go. But that's probably the biggest thing I learned about that. The other thing I did was hauled a couple of people that are relatively well-versed in construction. And we went into the tower. One of these gentlemen had never been inside the tower before. He was quite impressed, after all was said and done, with the building condition itself. Now, I'm gonna make two distinctions. The building is the pile of bricks. From the sill, the roof would be considered what they call the cab, or the control cab. That has some issues. The wind blew out the south and the west portion of all the framework that held the glass in place. It's wood. The roof has leaks. One of the gentlemen that was up there said you're going to spend the majority of your money in the restoration from the concrete sill of the cab tub to the roof. And that makes a lot of sense. The glass is going to be relatively expensive, up to a certain standard, but they don't want to spend a ton of money on the construction. And as a consequence, mortar lines on the bricks are relatively thin. Well, these suckers, and you don't see it as much from the outside because it's white. But when you get on the inside and see the contrast between the mortar line between the bricks and the yellow bricks, he said, man, look at how thick those are. The intervening floors, the first floor and the second floor is a concrete floor. The third floor is also a concrete floor. The tub is board-formed concrete. Everything sits in concrete. The control room floor is wood, but everything else up there is concrete. And so he said it's in remarkably good shape for how old it is. The other thing I want to say is, we were talking about Bill. 20 or so years ago, I think he submitted paperwork to the Historical Preservation Office concerning the tower. When I first made contact with that office down there, they said, well, we have a little bit of stuff, but not much. But what I can tell you is at the point in time 20 years ago when the original paperwork was submitted, that we considered the tower eligible to be on the national list. And he said, unless you have something to update that and change that, that's still what our opinion would be. So I still believe that fundraising and restoration, that's our pathway for the tower, if in fact we do want to continue this process. That's all I have. I'd be open to questions if you had any, but thank you for your time this morning.
The university has abandoned their interest in the tower. And they've removed it from their lease.
So because the state already would approve it for landmark status, does that remove a step from your process with the consultant?
No. You still have to go through, there's a fairly, and I didn't understand a lot of what I was reading, but there are several different surveys that have to be completed. Basically, you have to show ownership. Until I actually see the proposals, that will put it in context for me, but I think what it does is it just makes it more, I think the state's standard wasn't as high as what the federal government standard would be for national landmark status and the paperwork to back all that up. So, again, because I don't have any background or experience in any of that whole historical landmark stuff, the paperwork, I'm a little bit out of my depth. But from what I understand, and the reading that I've done, the stuff that I could kind of wrap my head around, it is a fairly involved process.
Okay.
So, Stuart, when you started out, you said, I'm just trying to understand that process. And it sounds like the consultant is the direction that we need to go. And as a board, we need to, I guess, get those proposals in to decide if that's the direction we want to go. But you said that the municipality, these certain individuals and organizations cannot apply for it. So who would be applying for that status?
The explanation that I surmised from the reply would be Corey Jensen is the compliance officer. Only state and federal agencies are allowed to apply for landmark status for a building or land. And so Corey and his office at this point in time would take the proposal, if we choose to do that, from the consultant, and he would represent us. He would be our advocate in that process with the federal government.
Is he willing to do that? Is he willing to do that?
Oh yeah, I think it's his job. I think that's what he does. That's what he was hired to do, and among other things is to take those proposals that come from outside of the state or federal government and submit those in that process, follow through, and communicate with whoever he's representing in that.
So what's the difference between being a state historic site and landmark status
Landmark is the only status.
prior to the 40 years of what?
Utah abandoned their historic list, like landmark list, like the federal government list 40 years or so ago, deciding that it was a duplication of the federal government's efforts and they no longer needed to do that or should do that.
Okay.
So they haven't been doing anything like that for about 40 years, is what they said when I asked.
The contractors you went, and you say you went with a contractor, did they give you any kind of idea of pricing, even a price range of what it would cost?
No, and that again shows my inexperience. I didn't say, okay, if you were going to bid this job today, ground to the roof, can you ballpark me a figure? And I'm going to follow that up today and include that in an email to John either later on this week or first of next week, because I did not ask.
Did you ask on the consultant? I'm just curious if we know their costs.
The consultant is basically hired to formulate, put together, and submit a request to the federal government for landmark status of the building. And I don't believe it takes any of the construction issues into play.
But do we know what the cost of hiring that consultant is?
Without the proposal, until I get the proposal, I won't know.
Okay, I just was curious.
I didn't ask that question either. I figured he's going to send me paperwork anyway, so.
And do we find the status would give us more opportunity for a grant? Does it also restrict the ability of building permit to be able to maintain a certain structure so that it doesn't detract? Does it paint us into a box?
I'm sorry?
I said, does it paint us into a box? Does it paint us into a spot that we have to maintain the character and nature of the building?
Yes.
And what if our future use of the building doesn't necessarily fit that character, and we've painted ourselves potentially into a box?
No, I don't think you paint yourself into a box with respect to use.
Okay.
You paint yourself into a box with respect to the structure.
If you wanted to remove it in the future because you needed that property, I think it, yeah.
No, and
Into a box on that
Right.
side. I just want to know and understand
I'm not
what
certain,
the
but I think
consequence
so.
or benefit is to it. I just, just trying to ask those kind of questions.
So maybe
Sure.
when we get the consultant's report, we can kind of have another discussion and they'll give us some guidance on that, I'm
Well,
sure.
I asked the question earlier. I said, okay, what exactly does this mean for the airport? And the fact that it's on the list, if you want to tear it down tomorrow, it's your building, you can tear it down tomorrow. That doesn't prohibit any of that from happening. What they're more concerned about is, as you say, we know what the tower looked like when it was built in 1942. They're concerned that it maintains that look today so that when you look at it, you're actually looking at the tower as if it was built and you're just encountering it for the first time in 1942. They're concerned about the historical portion of that, and that's what they're all about. I mean, you look at the homes here in our valley, the outsides of them haven't changed probably at all. They look identical to how they were built. And I think that's the concern, but it doesn't stop you. If you wanted that 15 by 15 footprint and whatever that sits on, it would not stop you from demolishing that, even though it's listed on that register. It's your property after all,
We
correct?
have more to learn.
Yes, oh yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I like history. I think that preserving that World War II history in our valley, since we were so connected with it at one point in time, is fairly important.
I would love to just see kind of the vision. What do you see that, I mean, I've been through it, saw what you saw. Do you see that building as being a occupied building of a, I don't mean to fill in, what do you see that building being used as? Honestly, that's what I'd like to see. If it's restored, then what's it gonna look like?
Well, probably much like it does today without all the junk. But my vision, when I first thought about this idea, I want to see it open to the public. I want to see folks who have an interest or who are directed from a tourist bureau somewhere to be able to go up onto the top floor and sit up there and watch what is happening on the field. Listen, even. I envision some speakers up there with local CTAF radio traffic from all the students and the people that are in and out of the airport. That's on the cab in the top floor. What I kind of envisioned for the intervening floors, the first floor, at one point in time, that tower housed the airport manager. I could see putting an office for the airport manager back in the tower. The upper two floors probably were offices for the Army when they were here, but I could see turning them into a small museum where we talk about the history of the tower, the history of aviation in Cache Valley, the history of USU and aviation, and the contribution that the university, as well as the communities in the valley, gave to the World War II effort, and to recognize those people that were in the past that really took care of us. So that's kind of how I see it.
Thank you.
Any further?
Thank you for what
Thank
you're
you.
doing. We really appreciate you digging in. Chairman, I'm just wondering, is there anything, you made a comment about the university has relinquished their lease. That falls back on us. Do we have
I just wish we could get it boarded up, and maybe that's me being overcautious. We have coned off and flagged off the parking lot around it and out onto the ramp. But every time I drive by it, I just worry a piece of glass is gonna fall on a car, or on a student, or on an airplane, or another gust of wind's gonna come up. So that's a concern of me. I wish we could get it either boarded up or glassed up, but I know there's a lot of steps before that. Like Stuart was saying, a lot of the framing is damaged. So there's that, and we are spending some money. We've rekeyed it, which is a few $100s, and then the power was coming from Utah State's hangar, and they're trying to disconnect that power. Doesn't really so the power goes to a gate right there that the FBO uses. There's fuel trucks and other vehicles coming in and out, and so they want to disconnect that power. So we thought about doing an extension cord, which would be a cheap-ish temporary, but long-term, if we have to get electricians to come in there to either repower it or put some conduit in, and I don't know where that power is coming from. So there are definitely, in my mind, some current concerns that I don't know how to address. We have thought of some temporary as far as the power goes, but
Does it need power?
the gate does. So the gate is, there's a gate right next to it that the fuel trucks drive in and out of, and then other vehicles come in and out of there. And so the gate needs the power is what it is. So we,
And the university's disconnecting, the tower itself doesn't have power, or does?
they were hoping April 1st to have that disconnected. They've been nice enough to give me a couple more weeks to try to run an extension cord over there, but even that extension cord's gonna have to come from the FBO probably, and they have said they're okay with us using their power. So those are kind of,
Extension cord anywhere near the fueling center?
the fueling center, no, the fuel trucks, yes, it runs right by them, but they have
Extension cord
extension
sounds
cords.
like a liability issue.
Yeah, they have extension cords that they plug into their trucks, for like their heater blocks and things like that. So the extension cord would probably cost some money if you get a good quality one that long, and then I'm looking into buying like a rubber speed bump to protect it, which those are gonna cost a few $100s as well.
Well, let's look at a permanent solution.
For the gate. I mean, the gate has,
Let's you and I meet. I might know some electricians that can look at that.
I'd feel a lot better from the liability and.
I didn't hear that. Did he say Cache Valley Electric would take care of that?
Strike that from the
Yeah.
record.
He said, let him have a conversation behind the
Let's
scenes.
see what we can do. And then from a liability standpoint, do we want Jason to be talking to some contractors, just getting a bit of what it would take to secure the top, just so there would be no.
Yeah, and maybe it just needs to be plywood.
Interestingly,
But
we've talked to 2 contractors, and both of which say they won't touch it
Perfect.
because it doesn't suit their people on the airport. They have a heart with the airport, but their business model doesn't include working 45 feet in the air. And
So are
even
there,
to the point of, they won't even be involved to put plywood over the windows, so we're still looking.
Okay.
are there pieces of glass that are liable to fall out?
There's still some glass in one spot of it, not all 4 sides came out.
All the loose glass from the open areas have been removed, but there's still one side where there's an entire piece of glass. But now that it's open, the risk is greater for additional damage from wind.
There was an incident a few weeks ago where more blew out, not as bad as the first time, but so.
It's a continuing concern. Did that answer your question about
Did,
concern?
thank you. Yeah, as long as we're working towards.
We're trying to
Perfect.
mitigate. Taylor, have you been doing anything?
Yes, let's come up, if that's okay. So, Mr. Chair, if it's all right, I'll call on a couple of members of the audience for some support here. So, as some of you are aware, hopefully, there's been negotiations and discussions between the airport authority and a private investor for a development agreement of Taxi Lane India. And myself and Logan City attorneys have been discussing this with Mr. Allen at length, talking about possibilities and wordsmithing language in the contract. And I just wanted to, there were some questions brought up, and I wanted to refer ourselves to the 1992 interlocal agreement that created the airport authority, just to put some concerns to rest. So there was a question brought up that it was considered that maybe the airport authority is not able to bond. Just referring you to section 6 of that agreement, part D, where it says no bonding powers. It says, notwithstanding any statutory provisions to the contrary, the authority shall have no power to issue bonds or allow liens to be placed against the real property of the authority without the prior consent of the parties. And so the parties would be Cache County Council and Logan City Council, for your reference. So if any bond was going to be placed on that real property, it would have to be with consent of the parties. However, this bonding power prohibition does not extend to revenues of the airport or expected revenues. So if the airport, for example, was going to get a $500,000 grant that seemed relatively certain, and we wanted to seek some municipal financing for that, that would be allowed under this agreement.
But it would have to be approved by both councils?
That's correct. Every bond would have to be approved under the council. So in section 18, just to refer you to that, construction major projects. No major projects or construction shall be undertaken with respect to the airport or any improvements thereon which exceeds the budget of the authority without prior consent of the Cache County Council and Logan City Municipal Council. So just for clarity, they put it in.
Indeed, the highest priority of the Airport Authority Board in terms of our next construction project.
I'm not in a position to answer that, so I would have to defer to other members.
And again, I should have, I just didn't have time to inform myself.
I do have, there's actually a PowerPoint on that has that, the explicit ranking for
Okay.
the schedule of the funding that I can share with you.
Great. Like I say, I think there are a lot of problems, so at least for now, my suggestion would be to withdraw that proposal. There were many, a variety of problems, which I shared with several folks, but let's not put the cart before the horse. And again, do we know if we have that $500,000 grant? I mean, is that?
So that's something that I wanted to tag team with Judd. So funding processes from the FAA and from the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there's always going to be conditions placed on that, and those conditions are always going to be contingent, and the government will never come out and say, here's a blank check. So Judd can talk a little bit more about that and educate us on that.
And that's why, as a city, we absolutely never count on grant funds until we have received them in hand. So, again, my preference would be to simply table this India development contract until we get a little more information, and let's hear a little bit about the priorities. But
Let's continue to share the information that you have accumulated.
Sure. Mr. Allen, do you want to step up and give a little bit of background for this agreement?
So,
so if you'll come up,
To the microphone.
In context, Kevin, it may be helpful for Judd to do his thing in talking.
Yeah, order of operations, if you want to step up and talk about our funding process.
And because
Sorry, Kevin.
So close.
Stay tuned.
Almost
Stay tuned.
there.
I need to get my steps in today.
because the need was established in what Judd is going to present.
And address your
help
explicit
me to
question.
refresh my memory. Thank
And
you.
the others stepped in to address that need.
There we go. Okay, so don't be scared by the number of slides you see before it pops up. I spent some time just trying to have something to show on any potential questions that might be arising. So you were asking, where does the funding and is that funding guaranteed? Very, very basic. We're talking about grants from the FAA that are run out of the Northwest Mountain region. The Utah office is run out of Denver. It's the Denver ADO. So I do know the difference between the arrows showing Utah and Colorado. When it comes to actual types of funding, there's the standard airport improvement project list, and that's what is used to develop the capital improvement list, and it's using entitlement funding. There's lots of different types of federal money. A very common one that you heard many times is a discussion of entitlements, and for your airport, those entitlements are $150,000 a year. It's not a we're not giving you, or it's not the FAA saying we're giving you 150K, it's the FAA saying 150K is entitled to you, that can be used or saved for grants. A big difference of that versus what's on the right-hand side, the bill or the AIG funding, is that entitlements get appropriated annually. So we all remember different times where the federal government has shut down because of, often related to debt ceiling. And there's no more money. Entitlements are tied to that. So each year they have to be allocated. Now we can plan ahead for what's going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, 10 years for project list and how those entitlement funding could be used for a particular project. But it's based on the idea that money will be obligated annually. In addition to those annual obligations for entitlement funding, there's additional pots of money from the FAA that they have in state apportionment and discretionary funds. So it's just different money that the FAA can provide on an annual basis, and it gets allocated and obligated annually.
And that money can be applied for taxiways?
That money can be applied for taxiways. Now, a very different set of money came about with the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill. In FAA terms, they refer to it as AIG. With that, the money was, when that law was passed, all of the money was set aside. So instead of each year, we expect that they will fund the entitlement funding. They fully funded 5 years of money up front. So it's actually more guaranteed than entitlement funding. Now, the FAA has never not provided that entitlement funding.
But you still have to go through the annual
But
process to quote,
on the,
apply and get the project
congressional,
approved.
well, for each project, you have to get it approved. And I'll talk about that here in a quick second. But annually, Congress has to approve the money for the entitlement. The bill funding, they approved and set aside 5 years of that funding.
So it's not in addition to the entitlement money, it is instead of.
It is in addition to.
So they set aside an additional 150 per year for us.
No, it's actually more. Oh, sorry. So the way that money gets allocated in the bill funding is based off of where do you fall in the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, the NIPIA system. And in your case, there's commercial airports, general aviation, cargo, military. You are a regional airport. And so with that bill funding, instead of the $150,000 entitlement, which you also have, you get $295,000 per year for 2022, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So in addition to the entitlement funding that is available to the airport, there is the bill funding of $295,000 per year.
Do we have to apply for it, or does it just come?
You have to apply. It has to be done. That money is available to you, but it has to be done and spent on an approved project that is relevant for the airport. So for any project on the airport, even though the funding is available, it still has to be, so really quick running through, and just in case you're curious how the funding works, state, this is, yeah, unfortunately, it's probably bigger on this screen. This is that 5-year capital plan. We can come back to this in a second. But you have to say, you ask the question, is it approved for funding? This is that checklist that the FAA runs through. Is the project, so the funding is there, but just because the funding is there doesn't mean you can spend it on whatever you want. And for a particular project, the FAA goes through this checklist. This is one of the pages out of the 1,000-page FAA handbook. So to read through, is the project eligible? Is it justified? Is it on the airport property? Because they won't fund things that are not airport property. It has to be on the airport layout plan. Sponsor satisfied intergovernmental review and airport user consultation. So yes. So is the project eligible? This is the first one. This is out of that same handbook. Taxi lanes are used for access to and from Public use taxi lanes, which serve multiple buildings, are eligible using the same funding rules that apply to taxiways. So is it this particular project eligible for funding? Yes, it is, according to the FAA's manual. The next one is
Read the last sentence on that.
a taxiway or taxi lane that exclusively serves a hangar or building is considered part of that hangar or building, and therefore it is not approved. That's why when we are looking and have been designing Taxiway India, sorry to scroll through, Taxiway India, the funding is only approving the actual taxiway. That's the dark area located here. The areas between the taxi lane and the hangars are not eligible for funding, so therefore they're not included. Obviously, they will have to be built by who's ever building the hangar, but the eligible funding is only that which is the common use taxi lanes.
And there's a nuance that you cannot use entitlement money for taxi lanes.
So, yeah, there's a lot of what ifs, but in terms of this project with utilizing the bill funding, it is eligible.
This is a taxiway, not a taxi lane.
No, taxi lane.
Okay, I'm trying to get,
The difference being,
right.
there, you have your runway?
But this
Okay.
project is eligible for
It
those funds.
is
Okay,
eligible.
that's what I
For
need
the,
to know.
for the secondary
I don't-
funds. Yeah, the secondary funds, but not the annual entitlement.
Oh, right.
So at that point, if it's not eligible for annual entitlement, how do repair and maintenance get made on taxi lanes like these? So say we continue to build these, what's our funding source to maintain them as we go along?
The state has been helpful in the past. The FAA has been,
Helpful.
they've tried to be economical. I'm not quite sure of a nice way to say that. They've changed their minds 10 times over the last several years regarding taxiway funding and taxi lane funding. They've always had taxiways. They always had taxi lanes. Then they stopped taxi lanes, and then they tied them slightly to taxiways. It's becoming a national problem.
Taxiways service runways.
Okay.
Taxi lanes service hangars.
And as far as the maintenance, it used to be completely eligible. Then taxi lanes were not eligible in any context. Now there's,
Currently, taxi lanes currently are not eligible for maintenance side. Is that correct?
correct. But
Bill,
often
we
the
can't
state helps with that. And taxi lanes that are public use or go to a airport building are eligible. So, which is even, just adds in another layer of confusion. If there's a building attached to a taxi lane that is public use, airport owned, the entire taxi lane, including the asphalt going up to the hangar door, are eligible.
So we need to have a hanger on every one of our taxi lanes so that we can have, no,
At the end of.
Pilot lounge.
Right. Can we go back to the capital projects now?
Yep. So hopefully that I can, just quickly, if you would like, I can go through, I have examples in the slides that I've been flipping through, answer these if you have any questions on justification, environmental compliance, project cost allowable.
Is that additional funding, is it eligible for our equipment that we're desperately in need of? Does it qualify?
Bring up the CIP.
And so I'm trying to, actually going to back out of this and.
I was going to say that it is on our CIP.
So zooming in a little bit
The
more.
India.
Is that kind of our highest?
That's our, yeah.
So with the CIP, I circled these bill just because you are able to save up the bill funding, that special $295K each year. You can save it. You cannot borrow next year's to spend this year. That's something that the entitlements allows you to do.
Bill doesn't, but entitlement does.
Correct. That's why if we look at 2023 where this error is located, It says for 2023 entitlement, repay 2022 master project. So we started the master project. We were able to borrow 1 year of work so we could get started earlier on the master
You
project.
remember signing the transfer to Heber Airport? We borrowed their 150,000.
So this year, that money's going back to Heber.
So we don't have Taxiway India on until 2025.
Correct.
And we've also discussed some serious issues with the snow removal equipment and so on. Again, and again, part of this contract, as I understand it, was to provide financing for the project to go ahead now. I mean, we don't need financing, and if we do need financing, we should be going through a public procurement process, which I saw that was one of the questions. Have appropriate procurement procedures been followed? I mean, it would, you know.
In the terms of that particular question, that would deal with the construction procurement, not local match funding.
But what about finance? I mean, again, that just, it was,
This is set up where the cost would be incurred at time of construction, and then the grant would be issued in 25 to repay those private costs.
and what if for some reason we don't get the grant, then who's on the hook?
The way that this is set up is to, at that point, it would be the private person that paid for it, depending on how the contracts are established. In terms of this funding, the funding is, I guess, more secure than entitlement because all of those have been available. And the reason that I was including this list here of all of the different steps.
Yeah, there's also, were the project costs incurred after the grant was received? I mean, I know there are a lot of grants, it's like if you've already spent the money, that's kind of too bad.
Correct.
You don't.
And so
just-
with regards to, might be.
So for this,
Misunderstanding, with the bill funding, you cannot get the money ahead of time. That would be borrowing the money ahead,
okay,
which is not available with the bill funding. And to answer that, with the bill funding, frequently asked questions, can an airport borrow AIG allocated funds from a future year? No, funding will not be available ahead of the fiscal year of which it is allocated.
it says saved for up to 4 years to use on a larger project.
Correct. And that is what is laid out in the CIP, where the bill money was saved in 2022. It is some of it's being used this year for the lighting, the sign project. The remainder of that is being saved. It's being saved in 2024, and then in 25, once enough money has been saved up, the project would be reimbursed. So it is saving up that money.
Or the project would be initiated.
This project it very well, you can wait to do projects for the future. Or in the way it was explained to me, this project was being privately funded up front so that the airport could have the benefit of hangars now instead of waiting for 3 more years, 4 more years.
I mean, was there an interest rate associated with the contract? I mean, there wasn't anything in the proposed contract.
And that, I'm
So
not
it's like, are
familiar
they
with the-
financing this for free? I mean,
One other thing from you.
I just,
Explain the process that with entitlements or any of these grants, we are noticed that a grant may be available. Your master plan, we had to submit a request for the grant, which included total costs, contracts, and everything prior to them approving the grant. On any construction project, we have to submit a completed package which includes a bid from a contractor, all of the disadvantaged requirements, all inclusive, before they will then accept our project for a grant.
Correct.
And in every case, the money is not paid until the construction work is completed. Now, there is provision for periodic draws, but all of the funding comes after the work is done. Is that accurate?
I mean, with the exception of especially larger projects, like one that's going to take many months, like the runway project, there were multiple, the grant was issued, and then multiple drawdowns. So it's obviously not a completion.
So you said the grant is being saved.
The funds.
The AIG funding is being saved.
Correct.
So have we submitted a project for that AIG funding?
That is what this exact list does. By putting this project on this list, that's saying that
This project?
the Taxiway India, the Circle of 2025. So this is that project. This is the multi-year of all of the different projects. But this capital improvement project list is saying this is setting aside the money for that project.
But we're using it in between for other stuff.
No, it's just sitting in an account at the FAA. That's what the
But you
bank.
said you drew against it already.
We will this year. We are also, with all of the old signs that need to be replaced according to the 139 inspector,
Right?
that project is being funded this year.
Okay.
It's a smaller, it's not using all $295,000 available to the airport this year.
So we sent a thing to the federal government saying we want our $295,000 for 5 years, or how many ever years it was for this granting, the AIG funding. And we're gonna use it on this project and this project.
Correct.
Is that what we did?
Yes.
And what about the one, there's one in the middle that I can't read. Fuel storage? What is that one?
Well, we also had the fuel shut-off. We had, we talked about that.
Right, but so why is that one red?
This one was after a January conversation, that this got added in because of the report that came from the 139 inspector, that the fuel system needs to be, in the short term, the fuel shutoff switch to be compliant with that, but then in the longer term, it needs looking at replacement of the fuel system.
Okay, so if we spent $750,000 on that, and 201 and 176, that's well over $1 million, and we're going to get $1.5 million?
Pretty close. All said and done with across the entire 5 years of the bill funding, it's just under 1.5.
Okay, and so then we only have $600,000. We're $100,000 under our anticipated cost.
There's also
Taxiway India.
There's also the entitlement funding, which is the 150 per year. So that's the 750 over a 5-year period.
Which can be used on all these projects or
Correct.
not?
I apologize, I have something I have to be to, but I'm not comfortable with the contract the way it is, so if we can maybe have further discussions, that would be my vote if you vote on it. I apologize, excuse me for slipping out.
And tell me, I apologize, I am going to be writing the equipment side of things a little bit until we get that solved. So tell me how this solves that or where that's solved, because India should wait until we have enough equipment and the right equipment to be able to maintain or take care of India and the rest of the airport. So I'm going to be on a on a little bit of a side course, so I just want to make sure how we're funding that here.
So this is showing utilizing entitlement funding, so that's the 150K per year, utilizing the 2024, so obviously this year's money is going towards the master plan. And
How
then
much was the master plan? I wasn't here when that was done.
it's roughly 350.
Okay.
I apologize, I should know that off the top of my head, but it's that ballpark. And so that was last year's and this year's entitlement. And then the 24 and 25 entitlement funding is going to snow removal equipment.
Okay,
And how, is that how did I know that from this?
So they're still
Apologize for that.
Well,
Did I read
sorry.
that? What is that, how does that tell me that? The 25, the acquire
2025 acquire SRE snow removal equipment, SRE.
So we still are short.
answer her question by sliding to the right and show the state contribution on the fuel system.
Okay. So these columns were, if I will quickly go to, what we're looking at is the project cost, those numbers that we were just seeing, is the total project. How much is the FAA paying for? FAA has two sources of funding, the entitlement, and, well, they technically have four, as I described, different pots of money, but highlighted here with columns, the federal entitlement, 150K a year. Oh, sorry. And then the bill funding. Again, there's state apportionment, discretionary, just other types of federal money. Then whatever, so the FAA is roughly paying 90%, it's actually 90.63%, locally
What?
of the total project cost.
Of which total?
Any cost,
Any cost, every cost.
So on that
every
one,
project.
you'll notice that our portion is 4.6 of any project we do. Our portion is that 4.6%. That's the amount. So as large as the project gets, that's our share
Right.
in order to take money. Okay.
I do understand that part.
Okay.
It's just that we don't have that 90% in some of the columns. We have it under the bill instead.
Right, and because just a typo on my part, I apologize. The 90.63 would also be under the bill funding. Any money that comes from the FAA, any money coming from the FAA is coming at that 90.63.
So they don't pay 100% of a project anyway.
Generally, no. However, when COVID hit for 2 years, they did pay 100% of projects. So they did not, things did not stop when the country, for airports, when everything shut down within the country. But because most communities did not have revenue, just because their tax revenue went to nothing, for all intents and purposes, there was 100% FAA grants issued.
Okay.
But that was I want to say the first time in our lifetimes that I think they've gone 100% nationwide. But that wasn't for every airport. That was just for, yeah.
And the apparent shortfall that you pointed out is covered by that 600,000 from the state. That's on the fuel.
Discretionary.
That's
That
on,
they've obligated already?
I talked with the director of UDOT yesterday, and it is on the state's list. He met with Carlos Braceras, the director of transportation for the state, who is supportive of what's on the list. It is going to the Transportation Commission for final approval in June for funding to be approved for this coming year. So is it final? No, it's not. But there is full support throughout the Department of Transportation because the state also has this multi-year list that gets approved through the Transportation Commission.
And we have $150,000 to put toward it?
We do.
Okay.
So the need for taxing India, I kind of to talk about that, so we're talking about revenue wise. Have we looked at what that brings in? What's our rent? What are our rent be once we build that out? How much rent do we get for that property? What's our rent collection?
I do not know one.
To pay back the 150 or the amount, I just
That's
trying to
the
figure
base.
that out. What's the rent percentage?
I'm not, you want to talk about the?
How many square footage of hangar space can be built, and what's our rate? I mean, this is an easy question. It's not a hard one. If you did our master plan, this should be an easy question.
But I don't,
What's
I
our-
do not set your rates.
I understand. I got
Yeah.
our manager here. He'll tell me what the rate is. What's the amount of square footage of hangar space that this will create?
We don't know, because we don't have any applications for hangars.
It's being designed to be able to accommodate, right,
Those are
and these
buildable
are,
spaces.
this is actually one of the,
Space, right? This is our buildable space. We should know our buildable space on India.
Fire lanes in between the buildings, but, yeah, a
I mean,
number.
we should have a generic number.
off the top of my head, I can definitely get that to you. Given, I would need about 10 minutes to go through the actual plans that have dimensions on it. Top of my head, I do not know the square footage. I can tell you within 10 minutes at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
But as a reference, these buildings are roughly 100 foot by 50 foot, or 100 by 80s, I believe. Some of them,
100 square foot?
no, 100 feet by
Oh,
80 feet, so.
800 square
We can get to your point by saying 22 cents a foot. It'll take 50 years to get it back, and therefore we need to raise the lease rates.
I didn't jump all the way to that. I am a leaseholder there, so I didn't jump all the way to that. I'm just trying to understand how we get the investment of our 150. But at this point, we say we have it, we got it from somewhere. I just look and say, is that the need? I mean, is the need because we don't have enough hangar spaces? Because we have one empty spot that nobody wanted. So we have one there,
Nobody on the list.
and we got nobody on the list, and we're building a taxiway to build unknown number of hangars.
It's the
little
corporate hangar,
confused.
and that would be.
Am I missing something?
Question.
Because I think if we're not knowing the number of space, if we're not knowing what we are accomplishing and needing to accomplish, I think the tail's wagging the dog.
It appears to be a chicken and egg problem. We've got 35 people on a penciled list, none of which are now willing to pay the $500 because there are no hangar spaces on which they can put a deposit. We've got 5 people who are willing to pony up $1.25 million between them to fund the taxiway so that they can build the hangar that they need.
Except they want us to pay it back.
They want us to pay,
So they are willing to fund it up front. You're right.
that's right.
I agree with you.
And no interest.
But asking for it to be paid
And
back.
at risk, if for some reason we don't get a grant. In fact, they had agreed to pay that $1.25 million before bill funding existed. They were willing to do it, betting on whether or not the feds would change their policy on funding taxiways. So there is,
I think that's a great way to fund a taxi lane.
There
I'm not
is-
arguing the point.
there
I'm
is-
only making sure that we know the details before we get there.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I agree with you. I think if a private is gonna fund it up front, I think it's a lot, that's nice. I just think we need some more details. That's what I'm trying to get down to, a little bit more detail.
Private individuals will be building these hangars, so, and private individuals will build it to their specification.
let's see, Taylor,
So,
you and Kevin come forward.
So private individuals would be building these hangars to their private specifications. The specifications of Taxiway India or Taxi Lane India are extremely well-defined. So if you're looking for the definitions of the actual space that will be funded by, that's extremely well-defined. But
But in
what
the
people
past-
decide to build on their leased lots, that's up to them. And so they're going to submit those plans on their own because
In the past, we have determined how many lots there are on a taxi lane.
No,
Yeah, we have, they've
well,
all been,
that
they've been little
that would depend on the
designs.
size of the hangar.
just sorta. We've said, yeah, we'll do 50-50, but the first guy up says he wants a 70 by 50. So that eliminates the second 50 by 50. So we never know until we get the actual request how many lots or how many hangars are actually going to be able to build on a given length of taxi.
For actually building the building. So the guide is set up such that this area over here is very good and is set aside for developments of small hangars, 50 by 50, 60 by 60s, 40 by, small hangars over here. This area over here is for more larger hangars, so the 80 by 80s, 100 by 100, 10,000 square feet hangars. So the planning documents dictate here's a large hangar development on this portion of an airport, here's a smaller hangar development, where, I mean, they could be right next to each other, but they're not saying at this location you have to build exactly this size. There's some wiggle room in there, I mean, and that's just
But what,
nation.
Until you get to the last one,
But
which
John-
we're dealing with, which we've only have a 40 by 45 space left.
because somebody took too much room?
Actually, it was the guy behind him that took too much room because he built one that was an extra 25 feet deep. And so but yeah, you get to the end and you either decide you're only going to be able to build 50 by 50 hangars, which we have never done. We establish the depth and then based on requests, we respond to
Width.
the width.
So how did the guy build one 25 feet too deep?
We approved it 30 years ago.
It was back when,
I'm really confused.
In fact, that was approved before the taxiway behind him even went in.
so
Nobody expected that we'd ever build taxiway Foxtrot. So it was approved to come off Echo an extra 25 feet.
Chairman, I feel like we're going through a lot of data that we need to understand before we make decisions. No decision is going to be made today. However, if what I'm hearing, if I can just summarize real quickly, the next expansion would be India.
Yes.
That's the next logical place. That's why we moved our hangar. So we had a hangar, just for your background, we had a hangar on the flight line. We moved that to open this up to access that property. We felt like that was the right thing for the airport to develop that area before they head out further west and do more. And so from that standpoint, it's been on my mind, yes, we need, at some point that will get developed. To me, if we're out of hangar spaces, I think the next logical step is to look at it and say, with your master plan, to say, yes, India is the right way to go. And then if that's the case, then I believe we need to, I was uncomfortable, I'm like the mayor, I was uncomfortable with the agreement. And no, I don't think anything was trying to be done underhanded or anything like that. I'd just like to understand if in fact we've got private individuals that are going to fund that at no carrying cost. I just believe it's really important that the airport board controls that project from start to finish, that agreement we have, and I'll mention this to the attorneys, it talked in there about whether it was debt, whether it was equity. I don't care how that private group brings the money. To us, it's going to be, here's the money to do the project, and then in the event there's funding that becomes available, then I'm all right to have that revert back to them up to an amount that they've reimbursed, that they've put out. So it says cost in the original one, which that could actually be more than what they put into it, because there will be other people funding that as well. We just need to clean it up, and so,
And maybe this is the time to go back to the attorneys, because they've been addressing the very questions that have been raised in the last week or so.
and maybe they've got something they can recirculate. We can
And
get
was there
comfortable with.
a portion of the contract that stated that the funder would have access to hangar lots, hangar spaces?
That needs to be clarified and cleaned up. I agree with
Yeah.
you. It just would go through the normal procedure, put them on the list, so Kevin would put them on the list and say, this
Well,
is the
and
size.
to address that question, their names, the first one is going on the waiting list with the $500 check today. So
Right,
they are going to comply
And they should. That-
I understand.
with
I
the
would
waiting
expect
list.
Yeah, I understand.
Attorneys,
I would say, as far as making sure everything is done, that is exactly what our scope of Armstrong scope of work is doing through this design process. We are ensuring all of the steps, we're treating it just as if you were getting a grant this year instead of a future grant, yes.
My worry, one of my worries, is at that point we have a larger hangar. Is that, I guess my question boils down to is what was identified, what was the size of the plane or size of the hangar needed that was identified in the master plan? Because I have seen because of the cheapness of leases at the airport of land, people will build an extra large building and house other things other than aviation. Heaven forbid, hopefully that doesn't ever happen, but I've heard it, I've seen it before. But at that point, then they are using precious small commodity land at a discounted rate or actually a taxpayer subsidized rate for storing things that aren't aviation. And I want to just go back and say, what was the need identified in the master plan for the size of a hangar, and that we don't just allow larger hangars just because that's what somebody may want, but what do we need by the hangar? And that's where I come back to, because heaven forbid we're subsidizing the storage of RVs and fancy cars.
And that is exactly what, as an authority, as a manager, those are the exact things that you do not want to have happen. The FAA actually explicitly says, no, you can't do that. It has to be for aviation.
They say that there's some aviation-related item inside of it. They're pretty broad in that.
They're pretty broad. They have definitely narrowed it down. They actually went all the way over here a couple years ago.
Pendulum swung a number
where
of times.
They said nothing but airplanes. You can't even have chairs in there, is how far it went. Then it came back. So it really does fall to what you as the authority and as the manager, what policies do you have in place for
Does
standards?
the master plan identify the size of the plane that was needed?
Yes, it is.
class.
It's it's not a particular plane. It is a size class. It's a type, a Group 2 taxi lane development.
Which would mean the hangar sizes of?
Well, it's for wingspan, it's 110 foot of clearance for wingspans up to 79 feet of the FAA of the growth of that business type aircraft.
So,
I'll save my comment. Well, no. One of the concerns that we have at one time says, well, in order to submit a hangar request, you have to identify a specific plane. Doesn't work for Cache Valley because they don't know what their next plane will be. Doesn't work for me because I don't know what my next plane will be. I've had 4 airplanes in that one hangar, and everybody out there, their plane ownership evolves. And so to identify going in a specific size hangar is not workable. Because, you got to get 6 feet more wingspan or an extra motor or whatever. Again, let's go back to the attorneys. They've addressed many of the questions that have been raised.
So I would agree that the agreement is not perfect. It's a starting point. And if anyone can find me a development agreement where private funds will fund a taxi lane, I'm more than happy to look at it, because this is a very unique situation. It's a situation that came about, frankly, years ago with a conversation between Craig and John. How can we do this? How can we expand the airport without the ability to bond? And at the time, we thought that was the case. How can we do it without the ability to bond? How can we do it without the ability to borrow money? How are we going to do this? We certainly can't do it off of the revenue of the airport. And the grants, up until the one that we just got through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, were so small that you just couldn't do it. So how can we expand the airport? And that's how this whole thing started, was to try and help expand the airport. It's not some nefarious, and yesterday when I was meeting with the county, or the city attorneys, I got this sense that, and the mayor mentioned it, and I appreciate your comments, Brett, but it feels like there's some suspicion that some nefarious, sneaky way of trying to, no. It's a private individual who has the ability to help the airport expand. When John and I were talking last November, that this grant had been approved through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, that really allowed us to fast forward how we could do this. We could do this quickly. We could get the financing or provide the private financing. We've already gone through that route. To get this done quickly, to get this done so we could have it this summer and the airport could start leasing out those airport pads. We understand that we have to go through the procedures to get on the list. We understand that the airport board has to go through certain procedures to approve the project, to get the funding. We understand all that. So the agreement that you have in front of you is a starting point, and it's working. We're having this discussion that we would not have had if we hadn't submitted the starting point, and that's really all where we're at. So we are willing to work with the airport board to help in whatever way we can to get this done, including private financing. And all we ask in return is to be able to use some of those to get a lease on some of those pads. I think that's a pretty good deal. It's not nefarious. It's not trying to be sneaky. We understand that there's lots of procedures. I really understand there's lots of procedures we have to jump through to do this. But that's all we're trying to do. So when we met yesterday with the Logan City attorneys, and Taylor and I met numerous times, we're figuring out that there's a lot of different little things that we're going to have to work through. But I don't think it should take that much time. And now the airport could have those hangar pads that they could lease out and start to generate revenue for the airport that it wouldn't be able to do otherwise, and meet a growing demand for further airport hangar. The one hangar we have, we get a phone call probably every month asking, can I rent space in your hangar? I have nowhere to put my plane. I have this $2 million investment. I have nowhere to put my plane.
I'm going to stop calling you.
It's not you.
I want to buy that hangar.
Yeah, it's not you. You have a pretty nice hangar. But that's really what this is our efforts as a private citizen to try and help solve a problem. And that's why it's a development agreement. You see private-public agreements all the time. That's a growing trend because it helps solve a problem. It's helpful to the public, and it's helpful to the private groups that are interested in it as well. And that's how it started out as a development agreement. We can change it however you want, but we just want to help participate in helping these taxi lane India find life so we can get going and expand the airport.
Kevin, thank you for your words. Let me just hold you right there for 1 second, Judd. If we look at the SIP, we're moving down this path regardless.
Correct.
And so, to the extent that we move this direction, that doesn't hinder or hurt these conversations, Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, this doesn't impact anything you're doing with applying for those funds. We move down this path anyway. We get the snow removal equipment, we get the entitlement, we get the bill money. We're going that direction anyway.
Correct.
This is just to supercharge it, if you will.
Yes, it's one where if this had been 10 years ago, it would have been possible to borrow entitlement. If the goal was to do a taxi lane at the airport, you could have borrowed 5 years of entitlement or 4 years of entitlement a decade ago. The FAA has really gotten away from much more than 1 year of borrowing, like you just recently did with the master plan. But otherwise, you just save up money. The normal processes, or more frequent process, is to save up money, whether it's entitlement or bill funding, until enough funds are eligible, and then a project is completed. The only difference between this situation and that is the construction is happening first with some level of risk from the private money side, and then when the grant is available, the project gets paid for. So that's the big difference. Instead of saving up and then building the project once all the money has been saved, it's the construction's happening sooner.
Okay.
And to that point, one of the reasons behind doing it is the cost of goods. I mean, just look at how much things have gone up in the past 2 or 3 years. If you have to get that money and then 4 years from now begin construction, you've lost 4 years of revenue, and then the costs to do so will have gone up and perhaps even exceed the amount of money you got in the first place. Or if we build it now, at the cost locked in, I think the estimate's 1.5.
Well, it's less than. Because these numbers are before, they had to be submitted before we had any designs going on. So it is a reduced number.
And that's just for the roadway and the stubs. There's a lot more expense that will go into the hangars because you have to build all around it, as you mentioned. All this is for a road, a taxi lane, sorry.
It's an enhanced road.
It's an enhanced road.
Much
And
enhanced.
there actually is a road associated with this project as well, because of where the tax lane goes, you cut the existing road in half, and so therefore the new entrance road comes into play.
Well, and when you look at, Taylor, I'm looking to you specifically.
Yes.
There's a side of you that if it sounds too good to be true, what? It
probably
is.
is.
It is.
So,
And that's
I
where
mean,
we just need to make sure,
Yeah.
Kevin, that
Yeah.
we're protected.
And if I could just, allay some of the concerns that were raised, you mentioned that you wanted to make sure that the board retains total control of the project. That's section 1. The board hereby retains the right to audit, control, develop, organize, supervise, monitor, and manage the project. So that's the very first term of the agreement, is that the board maintains total control of the project. And as far as, describing it as a financing agreement, that's not really accurate, because Inspire, this LLC created for this project, is not charging us a premium. They're not charging us a financing fee. They're taking on a lot of risk. They're taking on the interest payments. They're taking on the time value of money that the opportunity cost of that money that they could use in another project somewhere else. They're putting that forward for this project in exchange for the right to build some hangars, which they will do at their own expense. So I'm not sure that you would be able to find a better deal or a more favorable arrangement for the airport, because this is, and I mean, I'm not going to describe it as philanthropic, because they are going to get reimbursed for their expense. But as far as the arrangement of fronting that money, that's extremely difficult to find at such a low cost. Of the only cost that they're getting from us essentially is this right of first refusal to build an hangar at their own expense. So that's an extremely good deal. to get access to this kind of capital
They're
up
gonna go
front.
on the list. So you call it a right of first refusal, but it's really, they're gonna go on the list just like everyone else.
I mean, when we
Right.
announced that the taxiway is being built, I would assume that you open that list.
Well, we are already on the list in about 15 minutes. We're gonna be on the list.
Yeah, right.
We understand.
And as far as, talking about hangar sizes and building too much hangar, I don't think that that's really relevant because the lease, the land is going to be leased either way. And so whether it's paid by 2 people, 3 people, or 1 person, that property is going to be leased and paid either way. So if you build a 300-foot hangar or, 10 or however many hangars you can fit in instead, 5 smaller ones, it doesn't, to me, that's not super relevant because the land is going to be leased either way. And having larger, more ample hangars, it attracts better customers. It makes the economy of Cache County better. Instead of having a lot of small, tiny Cessnas, you could, if you filled it full of Gulfstreams, that would be probably even better. So, for the economy anyway.
I mean, honestly, when I got involved with this, my advice to Craig was don't do it.
I'm struggling with the financial side of it. I'll be honest with you, Kevin. It's like,
Why are you doing this? But I've come to learn in my association with John and certainly Craig, airplane people are different people. They
You just
love-
offended everyone in
I
here.
know, I'm sorry. I said different, not weird. I said different. But they, oh my word, flying and all that is a passion. And that's why Craig's willing to do it. Because he wants a better airport where he flies into at least once or twice a week. So let's work through the details. Let's get it. Yeah, that's all it is. I agree. We just need to work through the details. There's a lot of details, but the agreement is a starting point. That's all it is. Thank you. Appreciate it.
As soon as you and the city attorneys can come to one mind on a draft, we'll get it out to the board members to see if they have additional questions.
Well, this has been helpful to us because I think we can now go back and tweak this to address a lot of the concerns that we've heard here today.
Well, a lot of it was ignorance on your part as to who you're dealing with.
Well, airplane people? Yeah,
And,
that's true.
and
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
And if we can't solve your problem, I know there's hangar space in Vernal.
Gulfstream size.
You're welcome.
I'd like to see that.
David Koch, you've been very patient. Thank you, Kevin.
Relatively quick here.
This meeting usually is over by 9:30.
Okay. I'm not going to get us back to 9:30. So, quick update on the zero emissions vehicle proposal we submitted to the FAA.
Some of you may not have been here when we approved the request that was submitted.
Yeah, I'll take a step back and maybe just give a recap. So a while back, Utah State and Electric Power Systems, so I work with Electric Power Systems, we proposed submitting a grant application for an FAA grant for zero emissions vehicle. Initially, our goal was to get basically an electric fuel truck paid for under the grant that we could then use to charge electric airplanes at Utah State. It looked good on paper until we talked with the program manager at the FAA, and he said, well, there's no certified electric airplanes yet, so it's going to be tough for us to approve this. But if you wanted to get a vehicle that replaced your existing vehicles on the airport, that was an electric vehicle, that would qualify for the grant. And the associated infrastructure, the DC fast charger, also is eligible under the grant. So we rewrote the proposal. This is the proposal here, basically to get a truck to replace the Jeep and the truck that are out at the airport right now, with an electric truck and a DC fast charger. The DC fast charger is pretty expensive by the time you get the infrastructure and the charger. And the initial feedback, I think from the ACO was, do you really need that big a charger to charge the truck? And the answer is no. And we kind of played our cards. They knew what we were trying to do with putting something out there that would charge an electric airplane eventually. So we submitted it as it was. We were a little bit surprised that we got approval for the first round to submit a final application. So we made it through the first hurdle despite their questioning. I think they kind of said, okay, wink, wink, we'll do that. So the grant as a whole, our application for the grant as a whole was for about $230,000. And this was, kind of initial 3-page proposal, which was approved to go to the next phase. Now what we need to do is we need to sharpen our pencils and finalize this, get some actual quotes, get the real hard numbers, get a plan for where the charger would actually be located.
Can you locate it near the electric fence that doesn't work anymore?
I like the idea.
We were talking about that locations prior to the meeting.
Yeah, we could fix, kill 2 birds with 1 stone here.
Yeah.
Be careful when you say electric fence.
Send it to them.
Yeah, a little bit different power requirements, but
But the line, there's a line that goes in there that could just be like put in next to.
yeah. So the scope of the electrical work is probably a new transformer, a rectifier, a dispenser station, and the location out initially when we drafted this up was going to be between FL11 and 12. FL11 is the hangar that Utah State is leasing to EP Systems, which they need back, so that lease is expiring. So it may make sense to put it in another location. The idea would be to have it available for not only Utah State as they bring in electric airplanes, but any other electric airplanes, and obviously the electric truck that would service the airport. So that's where we stand right now. The proposal to get this, the I's dotted, T's crossed, and a more detailed proposal to them is that we would work with Armstrong Engineering, with Judd, with the airport manager, you, Jason, figure out the location, get some formal quotes in for the actual hardware, get some quotes in for the installation of the electrical equipment, and then submit that bid, which it looks like from the FAA website, we probably need to do in the next month or month and a half. And then it seems like there's a pretty good chance that they'll approve that. And that would be then, as we proposed this before and was approved by the board, a 90% cost share by the FAA. So,
And the state is aware that they would be participating. Judge had that conversation.
yeah.
At their 5%?
Huh?
At their 5%?
There's 5. And the reason that time frame is so short is that the Fed's fiscal year ends September 30th. And they've got that booked for this year's funding. And if they don't have it approved by the September 30th, then it's start all over.
Yeah, so pleasantly surprised that we made it to the final round. It seems like it's a pretty sure thing that we can get this added to the airport, largely on the dime of the FAA. I think the work now in the next weeks would be to get with maybe Utah State representation, Armstrong, the airport, and EPS. We're happy to help as we can to get this final proposal in and see if we can get it approved.
So the charger that you're putting there is for a vehicle, but it would accommodate the things you're designing and.
It'll
Yeah.
charge the vehicle in a minute and a half. It'll
It is.
take an hour
Awesome.
from here.
It's we scoped out a 250 kilowatt charger. I think a Tesla supercharger is about 50 kilowatts.
Okay.
So
You're gonna have to bring service in? Is there enough service there?
there will probably be a new transformer, but I think there's enough power from the substation.
Okay.
So we're looking at what we scoped out was a 400 amp service for
And what size of truck, and can it have a plow on the front?
I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't put a plow in the front.
I'd include that, that'd help it.
I pictured a Tesla semi with a plow on it.
I don't care whether it's Tesla or Volvo, it don't matter to me as long as there's a plow on the front.
Yeah.
But, anyway, if you could have a plow in front of it.
Okay, John, I gotta tell you, I gotta leave in about 5 minutes.
I'm gonna try to get,
So I got 5 minutes left.
okay.
Then you're not gonna have a quorum.
Yes, next.
Hi there, I am Andrew Cluck, the president of Utah State University's Alpha Eta Rho chapter. I'm proposing the board to bring back the Frank M.D. Le Compress memorial race. As a chapter, we are aiming to raise around $2,000 for the scholarship fund. And we are going to be aiming to charge about $25 for entry. And we are looking to use runway 28 and taxiway Charlie for the event. We will be coordinating with the airport manager for planning and closing the runway and the taxiway. And we are hoping to host the event around October 14th, but we are willing to be flexible on dates. Thank you.
Run the runway.
For those
Yep.
that haven't seen it, it's a H, so we don't go on the main runway at all. And so you just run down Charlie and 1028, and that's exactly the 5K. We'll go through the fence at Utah State, so we'll make sure we secure that. And we'll have the opportunity to provide all security. We'll work with the airport manager to put the X's out on the runway in the past. We've got cones, signs, and water station, and we'll provide all the security.
And comfort stations.
Comfort station, yeah, we'll have a porta potty out there and then a water station, so we'll make sure that all that. Yeah.
What was the name of the run again?
Frank DeLeon Compress Memorial Scholarship.
What could possibly go wrong?
It's the fastest flags 5K you'll ever run.
Awesome. Not me, but yes.
Come on, Brett, I'll run it if you do.
No bikes, no pets allowed, just, so that's also.
Is there a motion to approve this calendar
I
item?
so move.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve this calendar item. Keep us posted on the progress. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned until further notice, and that
Just by
one.
way of announcement, remember, we're not doing the open house this summer with the airport, aeronautics board going to Davis. We're not going to compete with them. So we'll update you if you want to.
So the one we were going to do is no, that's off.
Oh, I mean, this way, people will be split between that event and ours.
Same
If it's
time.
the same summer.
That's a problem.
Yeah, so
I got you.
We're going to try to postpone until summer